This is the first of what I hope will be a short series of videos showing how you can use the GEMulator to learn how to solo roleplay or to enhance your solo role-playing games. The GEMulator is a fairly new product. It just came out in late January of 2023. Uh, there is already a review up by the Geek Gamers channel, a fantastic solo role-playing channel. But I noticed when I watched that video, there were some comments asking for a how-to. How can we use the GEMulator? So my hope is to put together a short series of videos that show how you can implement the GEMulator. And this is something that I'm hoping people who are brand new to solo role-playing will find this tool, find it very, very useful. A nice thing about it, it's free to try. So you can go to drivethroughrpg.com, download it, and it costs you nothing to give it a shot. So I highly recommend trying it out. But my hope is with these videos to give you a sense of how it's supposed to work, so that then you'll be able to implement it more easily in your own games. So the idea of the Gemulator is that when we imagine the way that a role-playing game typically works if it's a social role-playing game, we have the player characters, the players playing their own player characters, so each individual player having their own individual character that they're controlling. And then you have the GM or the DM, depending on the game you're playing. Sometimes they have other names, referee or what have you. But the person that is in control of the world and all of the non-player characters. So whenever you do a solo role-playing game, you would very much like the player in any role-playing game. You have your player character or characters. Some people like to play more than one. Some prefer just to play a single person's story. That's fine. But actually, that's my preference. In any case, then the question is, what do you do for the world? And that is where the Gemulator is there to help you. It is there to fulfill that role of the DM, the GM, the referee, the person in charge of the world. So it is set up to set up the campaign. What does the campaign look like? What do the individual adventures look like? Helps you answer questions about what's going on in scenes. So the Gemulator is really designed to take the place of that person and to help you fulfill that role in a way that nonetheless preserves some surprise. Now, the Gemulator is not designed to be used by itself for a solo role-playing experience, though I think you could do it, but it's really designed to be paired with another rule set for whatever the role-playing game is you'd like to play. So you're pairing the Gemulator with this rule set, whatever that happens to be. Put those two together, and we end up with a solo role-playing game. So what I have here now is the overall view of how a campaign works if you use the Gemulator. So the Gemulator imagines that a campaign is composed of this alternating sequence of adventures and what it calls a campaign turn. So first, adventures. So an adventure is composed of scenes, and each of those scenes, your player character is trying to accomplish some kind of goal. So you have something you're trying to do. You're trying to break into a particular building. You're trying to find a particular piece of evidence. You're trying to slay a dragon. You have some goal you're trying to accomplish in that scene. And these scenes all fit together to accomplish some larger adventure goal. Once that's completed, though, then you take a break. That's the campaign turn. In the campaign turn, you have two elements. One is downtime. Downtime is what is it that your player character is doing when they're not on an adventure? Are they running a business? Are they working a job? Are they training and upping their skills? Are they just resting and recuperating, recovering from the injuries that they may have taken in their previous adventure? All of these are downtime activities that would happen in between adventures. But at the same time, another thing happens during campaign turns, and that is random events. There are things happening in the world around you, to the characters around you, to the factions around you, to the kingdoms around you, that are going to have an impact. They may have an impact on you directly, it may be indirect, but at the very least, the world does not stop just because your character is taking a break. That is what these random events are. So the idea of the Gemulator is that you have a campaign that is composed of those two elements that alternate. So you take an adventure, then you have a campaign turn composed of downtime and random events. Have another adventure, then more downtime, more random events, and you continue going until the campaign is completed, as you have either satisfied the campaign goal or you have failed to satisfy the campaign goal in the number of adventures that have been laid out by the Gemulator. So let's get into a little bit more detail of how the Gemulator looks at a campaign. A campaign is really designed according to a number of parameters. So we have 6 different parameters that compose a campaign according to the Gemulator. And the Gemulator will help you in coming up with these particular parameters if you want them to be chosen randomly or if you want to choose them yourself. And the Gemulator also will take each of these elements and have some kind of consequence to it for how the story runs in terms of what do the adventures look like, what does the downtime look like, how many adventures are there, and so on. So getting into a little bit more detail. First, the first campaign parameter would be your premise. What is the campaign about? Is it a rescue mission? Somebody has been kidnapped and you need to go get them. Is it exploration, where you're trying to uncover the mysteries of a previously unexplored area? Is it perhaps a battle? Perhaps we're in the middle of a war and we're trying to defeat some terrible enemy that is going to be trying to invade our kingdom. All of these are possible campaign premises. So this is something that you might, in any of these cases, the Gemulator is going to provide you with some options. You can choose which option you like. You can roll, so it's randomly generated. Or if you have your own idea of what you want to do, you can always do what you want to do. After all, one of the joys of solo role playing is that you get to run the game the way you want. So if you have a premise you want to play it. So premise is the first thing that a campaign is built around. The second parameter is the length of the campaign. That is, how many adventures are there in your campaign? It could run anything from just a single, you have one adventure, so it's a one shot, where the campaign is just one adventure. That's it. To being somebody's life story. So you start with them very, very young, relatively low stakes things happening early on in their life, but then over time things accelerate. That's the design of the life story. Or it could be something in between, where there is, say, you're going to play this out over the course of 5, 10, 3 adventures, whatever it happens to be. And this is another thing. You get to make the choice, or Gemulator can randomly assign it for you. Scope would be the third element or the third parameter in a campaign. That is, how wide ranging is this campaign? Is it something that's personal? So we're really just following a particular person and things that are happening to them. Is it universal, where we're going to have multiple global factions that are all involved? What the scope is then going to determine, it will determine the number of elements that you have in each of your adventures. So these adventure elements might be things like if it's a personal campaign, certain characters. So you have, say, 4 characters that are going to be involved in each of your adventures. And then these are going to be people you're going to have relationships with. They will show up again and again. You'll have these types of things happening. Or in the case of a universal campaign, you're going to end up with a lot of factions that are involved. So these large groups that have an impact. Moving on from scope, you have stakes as the fourth element. That is, how important is this? Is it minimal consequence whether we succeed or not? Or is it of extreme consequence? If it is of minimal consequence, what this is going to do in terms of the mechanics is it is going to change those random events that happen in those campaign turns to make them less intense. On the other hand, if the stakes are high or extreme, then we're going to see very intense random events being more likely to happen. The fifth element is the theme. Now, this is something that's optional. It really doesn't have any mechanical consequence, whether you use this or not, but instead it helps to establish a mood. So you have themes like comedy or mystery or martial. So we have all of these options for what kind of feel is our story going to have. And then finally, the campaign goal. So this is something that you come up with where you try to figure out, given the premise of the campaign, given all of these other elements about it, what is your main character actually trying to achieve? And that is on you. Zooming in a bit, your campaign is going to be composed of those number of adventures, with the campaign turns in between. So inside of each adventure, there are again various parameters that are involved. One is that you're going to have the quest. That is, what is it that the quest giver wants you to do? So it might be that you are trying to defeat a particular monster. Right, that's it. That's this particular adventure is focused on defeating this single monster, perhaps. And so what is it the quest giver wants you to do? The second parameter is the giver themselves. Who is it that gave you this quest? Third one is what was their reason? What is their motive for giving you this quest? So each of these elements plays together to create a single adventure, and then that adventure is either successful or is not successful. Zooming in a little bit further, within each of these adventures we have scenes, and each scene has a number of parameters in Gemulator. First would be, what is the goal of the scene? This is something that you are expected to come up with. You want to figure out what is it in the context of the campaign and the adventure. What is it your character is hoping to accomplish in this particular scene? Every scene that you play should have a goal. And this is true, I think, anytime you're doing solo role playing. We're not just playing things out to see what happens necessarily, but when we start the scene, for us not to feel aimless, it's important that we know what we want to get out of that scene. I like the way that the Fate RPG describes this is that a scene has a question. It's attached to it, a story question. And that story question is normally, do we accomplish some particular goal? So thinking in terms of what is the goal of the scene, that is, what is it the character is trying to accomplish in that scene, I think is a great place to start. It provides the scene with momentum, with direction. A second thing that every scene needs is a location. Every scene is going to take place somewhere, so we need to know something about what is that location like. Third, the start. How are you going to start the scene? Now, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen as things go on. After all, you're going to be asking questions of the Gemulator. It will be answering those questions. You are going to be rolling for your character's stats based on the things they're trying to accomplish to see whether they're successful or not. You can't predict everything that's going to happen, and that's a lot of the fun. But at the very least, we should know how things start. Except the transition is that fourth element. So what the transition does is take the start that you have designed and possibly modifies that setup in some way. Now the transition is going to have some kind of focus. All of these are tables that are available there in the Gemulator to let you know exactly what's happening. So it might be something like, yes, you were heading toward that scene, there was some kind of positive interruption. So as you are moving toward that scene occurring, something interrupts you, but it's something that helps you. That's a possibility. And maybe it has a focus of something like a new non-player character. So at this point, you introduce a new non-player character that is going to help your character. It just happened to get in the way of you doing the thing you had been planning to do. And then finally, the end of the scene, you have the outcome. That is, did you achieve the goal? Did you fail to achieve the goal? Did you modify the goal a little bit and then achieve that instead? Or maybe you modified the goal and didn't achieve that. In any case, this question of whether you achieve the goal or not is then going to have an impact on the next scene transition. As you move from this scene into that next one, if you were successful in this scene, then you're more likely to have a positive outcome from the transition in the next scene. If you had a bad thing happen, or that is, you failed to achieve your goal in this scene, in the next scene, you're going to be more likely to see some kind of negative transition occur. Then we have those campaign turns that happen in between. I mentioned this before. You have downtime and random events. The downtime is asking just what does your character do between adventures? So they either accomplish their goal for the adventure or they fail to accomplish their goal. What do they do now that the quest is over? Do they acquire new skills? Do they run businesses? Do they start organizations? Do they just rest and recuperate? It's really up to you what your player characters are doing. However, at the same time, random events are occurring. There are things that are going to happen in the world that are occurring either during or between the adventures that you're having. Now, the exact number of events you have and the type of events you see is going to be set by the scope of your adventure. A universal adventure, you're going to see factions generally being the center of these events. If you have a personal adventure, it's going to be individual characters that are going to be more impacted. Random events are also going to be modified with the stakes of the adventure. So finally, I want to talk about the different ways that you can start an adventure using the Gemulator. So all of these are suggested in the Gemulator itself. So the first option would be to start planning at the campaign level. This is generally what would be recommended if you have no clue what you want to do. So you come in, you say, I would really like to do some solo role playing. I don't have any particular idea what solo role playing I want to do. I just want to do something. I feel like I have a particular rule set that I want to try, but I don't really know exactly what the story's going to be. Campaign is a great place to start. This is also really good if you know the broad strokes of what your campaign story is going to be. So start here. So the idea of starting with the campaign is that you start at the campaign level, then you build down to what your adventures are going to be, and then you build down from there to say, well, what kind of character reasonably is going to be involved with these adventures in this campaign? Another possible starting point is to start with an adventure. So this would be where you have some idea for what an adventure is going to look like, but you're not really sure if it's going to turn into a bigger campaign at all, perhaps, or what that bigger campaign might look like. So it's perfectly fine. You can start at the adventure level, just skip all of the campaign setup, start with the adventure setup. Another possibility would be to start with a character. This is something that I would often myself like to do, where I like to look at a new RPG system, design a character in that system, and then I want that character to do something, right? So in this case, I already have the character available. I just need to figure out, right, what kind of campaign is going to be built around that character. All of these are ways that you could potentially use the Gemulator, and the Gemulator itself does give examples for how you can do this. I hope in future videos to show how we can build specifically. I'm going to look at starting from the campaign point and then building down from there. But I certainly hope that this has given you some idea of what the Gemulator is, the perspective it takes for how we can set things up. I do think it's a fantastic tool for building a campaign that has the potential then to have a coherent story that's going to take place with related adventures all heading toward that single goal.